The night Edrin was meant to disappear from the world did not arrive with trumpets or prophecy, but with a sound, so soft it almost went unnoticed, a deep broken breath filled with pain coming from just beyond his door, as if the darkness itself had collapsed on his porch. He had lived so long at the edge of things that fear had become familiar, yet this felt different, heavier, charged with something ancient and wrong. When he opened the door, the rain and cold no longer mattered, because a dragon lay there massive, and wounded her once glorious body curled inward like a fallen mountain, trying to hide from the sky that had betrayed her. Her scales were cracked and darkened as if burned from within, one wing twisted unnaturally, blood soaking into the dirt beneath her every breath. A struggle that shook the fragile wooden porch. This was not the terror of legends, this was something far worse, a god brought low and bleeding at the feet of a man who had already lost everything worth losing. Edrin had once believed his life mattered, but war had taught him otherwise. Fire had erased his village, steel had erased his family, and the king had erased his future with a closed gate and indifferent eyes. He had learned how easy it was for the world to forget a man who had nothing left to offer, so he lived alone where roads ended and hope thinned, surviving on silence and scraps, waiting for the day fate finally finished its work. Yet when he looked at the dragon dying on his porch, he did not see a monster, he saw himself reflected in her suffering. Abandoned, hunted, broken by powers that feared what they could not control. Against every instinct drilled into him by fear and stories, he stepped forward, touched her trembling scales, and whispered words of permission rather than commands, telling her she could rest here, that she was safe for now. And in that moment something unseen shifted, as if the world itself paused to watch what kindness would do when offered without expectation. Days passed in fragile peace, as Edrin tended her wounds with shaking hands, giving her water, food, and something far rarer, trust. She told him her name was Ashael, and nothing more, speaking little, conserving strength, watching him with eyes older than the kingdoms that hunted her. He spoke instead, filling the silence with his pain, his losses, his loneliness, because being heard mattered even if the listener was a dragon. Rumors drifted on the wind, carried by marching boots and clanking armor, whispers of a fallen sky sovereign, a dragon queen betrayed by her own kind, cursed and hunted by kings who feared mercy more than fire. Still, Edrin did not understand the truth until torches lit the night and soldiers surrounded his home with weapons drawn and smiles sharp with greed, promising gold and favor if he stepped aside. He stood between them and Ashael, empty-handed and trembling, not with courage but with resolve born from having nothing left to protect except this one wounded soul who had trusted him enough to sleep. The betrayal came swift and brutal, as steel flew and fire erupted, tearing his fragile life apart once more. Edrin was thrown aside, pain exploding through him as he watched an arrow pierce Ashael and heard a sound no legend had ever described, the cry of a ruler who had given mercy and received cruelty in return. As her blood soaked the earth, the sky answered, her grief clouds tearing apart wind, screaming as ancient power surged free, and when she spoke her true name and title, the world bowed. Because the dragon on his porch had not been merely wounded, she had been the greatest leader the skies had ever known. Soldiers fell, banners burned, and the truth shattered everything Edrin believed about strength and weakness, because even gods could be broken, and even broken men could matter. When Edrin woke, the battle was over, his home reduced to ash and memory. Yet the sky was calm, and Ashael lay beside him, diminished, but alive, her power spent to save the one human who had chosen her when the world did not. She told him then of betrayal, of a curse meant to punish restraint, of a world that feared rulers who chose mercy over domination, and when he asked why she had trusted him, she answered simply that he saw her pain before her power. The armies would return, they both knew, but this time the Sky Queen would not rise alone, and the man who gave shelter to a dying dragon would no longer be invisible. Because sometimes, destiny is not forged in battle or prophecy, but begins quietly on a broken porch, where a weary dragon was allowed to sleep, and a forgotten man remembered that kindness could still change the fate of worlds. The night Edrin was meant to be erased from the world, did not announce itself with prophecy or thunder, but with a sound so fragile, it felt impossible that it could belong to something so powerful. A single broken breath, drawn in pain just beyond his door, as if the darkness itself had crawled onto his porch to die. He had learned long ago that fear arrived quietly first, as a pressure in the chest, then as a certainty that nothing good was coming, and yet he opened the door anyway, because a man who has already lost everything no longer knows how to turn away. Rain soaked his hair, and the cold bit into his bones, but neither mattered when his eyes fell upon the massive wounded shape collapsed against the rotting wood, a dragon vast and terrible and ruined her body, curled inward like a fallen god, ashamed of its weakness, her scales split and darkened, blood steaming where it touched the earth, one wing twisted wrong, as if the sky itself had rejected her. This was not the beast of songs and nightmares. This was something far more unsettling. Power brought low suffering in silence at the feet of a man the world had decided no longer mattered. Edrin had once believed life was meant to rise toward something brighter, but war taught him how easily everything could be taken. Fire erased his village, steel erased his family, and hunger erased his pride, until all that remained was survival without meaning. The city gates had closed to him like a verdict, the king's soldiers refusing even to meet his eyes, as if acknowledging him would stain their armor, and so he drifted to the edges of the world, living where roads ended, and hope thinned, learning how quiet loneliness could be. When he looked at the dragon dying on his porch, he did not see a monster, he saw a reflection, a being hunted for what she was feared for, what she represented, punished, not for cruelty, but for existing in a world that only respected violence. His hand shook as he touched her scales, warm and trembling beneath his fingers, and when he whispered that she could rest here, that she was safe if only for the night, something unseen shifted, as if the world itself leaned closer to watch what kindness would do when offered without demand. Days passed, wrapped in fragile silence, as Edrin tended her wounds, tearing apart the last pieces of his own life, to ease her pain, feeding her water and scraps, speaking to her, because silence had once nearly killed him. She told him her name was Ashael, and nothing more, her voice low, ancient, and weary, her eyes watching him with a depth that made his chest ache, because he had never been seen like that before, not truly. At night the wind carried rumors, whispers of a fallen sky, sovereign of a dragon queen, betrayed by her own kind, cursed and hunted by kings who feared restraint more than destruction, and though Edrin did not yet understand the truth, he felt it pressing in around them like fate, drawing tight. When soldiers finally came with torches and steel, and smiles sharpened by greed, they spoke of gold and glory and safety if he stepped aside. But Edrin stood before his home, empty-handed, knowing in his bones that stepping aside now would mean losing the last thing that made him human. The betrayal came swift and merciless, steel flashing fire, roaring pain tearing through him as he was thrown into the dirt, his vision blurring just in time to see an arrow strike Ashael and hear a sound. No legend had ever captured the cry of a ruler who had chosen mercy and been punished for it. The sky shattered in response, clouds ripping apart, wind screaming as ancient power broke free, and when she spoke her true name and title, the world bowed, because the dragon he had sheltered was not merely wounded, she was the greatest leader the skies had ever known, and she had been brought low by fear and treachery. Soldiers were crushed, banners burned, and Edrin watched in awe and terror as truth rewrote everything he believed about strength, because the strongest being alive had trusted him at her weakest, and that trust changed the world. When Edrin woke, the battle was over, his home reduced to ash, memories scattered on the wind, yet the sky was calm and Ashael lay beside him, diminished her power, spent her wounds still deep, but her gaze steady as she told him everything of betrayal by her own kin, of a curse meant to break her will, of a world that demanded monsters and could not accept rulers who chose mercy. When he asked why she had trusted a broken, forgotten man, she answered simply that he saw her pain before her power, and that choice bound them more tightly than any oath. The armies would return, they both knew, but this time she would not rise alone, and Idrun would no longer be invisible, because destiny does not always begin in prophecy or bloodshed. Sometimes it begins, quietly, on a ruined porch, where a weary dragon was allowed to sleep, and a forgotten man remembered that even in a cruel world kindness could still change the fate of skies and souls alike.